Hey guys, so I noticed that only a small percentage of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you like my content, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications to make sure that my content gets to you on time. Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk about simplifying a synergy. So this is kind of part 3 of my assessing your strongest board video. So basically, to understand your strongest board, you have to understand what your synergies actually do. I guess a big motivation behind this video is I see a lot of Twitch chatters. They often ask, why don't you put in X unit to give your team like Y synergies? So sometimes I'll see like, oh, why don't you put a Lawi here to give your team 6 brawlers? You know, everyone who plays the game kind of intuitively knows that like, oh, that synergy is not worth. Just from playing the game a lot. So today I actually wanted to kind of mathematically determine why a synergy is worth or not. So in this video, I'll talk about pretty much every single synergy in the game, exactly what it does, and how to break it down into something that is digestible. Most of the synergies in this game are just too abstract. Like, it's impossible to tell what Scrap is actually doing. But if you can break it down into something that like is simple to understand, although like the simple model could be a little bit flawed, but that's okay. You can use the simple model to understand your strongest board. In this video, there will be some math. If you want to skip the math, you're more than welcome. But I would definitely encourage you to actually understand the math so you can understand how to essentially understand synergies by yourself. Okay, so let me give you like a motivating example. So just as a very, very simple example. You have a 2-star Darius and you have a 2-star Caitlyn. Which unit should you play next, Sniper or Bodyguard? Now, if you played the game for, or at all actually, you intuitively know it's Bodyguard, but why is it Bodyguard, right? And for the sake of simplicity, let's just say the added unit quality doesn't matter. But yeah. So let's just break it down the math. So Sniper is a little bit abstract. Basically it's 8% bonus for each hex. Now Caitlyn usually attacks between 3 to 5 hexes away. It depends on your positioning, but roughly Sniper is about 24 to 40% damage increase. Let's go ahead and simplify this to 20% damage increase. So basically giving Caitlyn Sniper is about 30% damage increase. And then for Bodyguard is really simple if you understand armor calculations. I'll go ahead and leave the detailed armor calculations in the next slide. But basically Bodyguard gives you 100 armor and 100 HP. So armor is essentially calculated as like, if you want to calculate your effective HP you get from armor, basically you do the following equation: 100 plus armor plus your already existing armor, and then divided by 100 plus your already existing armor. So in this case, Darius has 40 existing armor, so you put 40 here and put 40 here. And Darius gets 100 additional armor from Bodyguard, so 240 divided by 140. In this case, 100 armor gives Darius about 71% more effective HP. And then if you add the 71 plus the 100 you get earlier from the shield, you get that Darius 2 with Bodyguard gives you about 430 effective HP. So in this case, would you rather have essentially Bodyguard, which is giving you about 830 more effective HP, or 30% damage increase on Caitlyn? I mean, I guess you would have to plug in the base stats for the units, but in this case, it's not even close. The Bodyguard wins by a landslide, and essentially that you should always play Bodyguard in this case. You can also keep in mind for this particular case, for the 100 armor, Darius's ability also scales with the armor, because he heals with his ability, and the heals are more effective on high HP targets, high armor targets. So Darius is a high armor target, so his healing would be a lot more effective. So just in this example, you can show that by understanding the synergy, Sniper being a 30% damage increase and Bodyguard being a 71% health increase, you would understand that Bodyguard is definitely the way to go mathematically. Now here's the armor calculation. I'll leave a link here, but basically armor is pretty simple. You can use this equation to calculate the damage reduction. Keep in mind, a 20% damage reduction is 25% effective health. A 50% damage reduction is 100% effective health. So earlier, I was using the effective health calculation. You can also use the damage reduction calculation. Cool. So now, additional things to consider in this toy example. So we have a Darius 2 and a Caitlyn 2. The unit that you add do matter. So let's just in this case, you're deciding between Poppy 1 and MF1. Poppy 1 being the Bodyguard for Darius, MF1 being the Sniper for Caitlyn. Here, it's still probably Bodyguard, but it's a lot closer, right? Because MF1 is a lot better unit than Poppy 1. MF1 does a lot of damage, and if like if MF1 can do enough damage to out value than the effective HP from Darius, then it does matter. And then also star value, star levels do matter. So in this case, Darius 1 gets a lot less effective HP for armor because his base health is a lot lower, right? So that means that the armor is giving him a lot less effective HP. So if it was Darius 1 versus Caitlyn 2, would you add snipers or bodyguard? In this case, it's still probably bodyguard, but that's probably because Caitlyn needs a frontline for her to operate. But like if it's another DPS unit, then maybe this toy example can swing another way. Okay, so then another thing to consider in terms of synergy is to basically use that number we got earlier to see how much value it actually is compared to adding another unit, like compared to the ability of another unit. So earlier we talked about how snipers is 30% more DPS for Caitlyn. So, you know, take Caitlyn's DPS and times it by 30, and then times it by 1.3, and then Kog'Maw's DPS times it by 1.3. Now, is that more valuable than, say, adding a Talon? Even though Talon doesn't have any synergy with Caitlyn, so Caitlyn's, you know, has no bonuses, and Talon has no bonuses. But here, Talon 1 actually does more than 50% of Caitlyn's DPS. Often the case is that Talon 1 will do maybe around like 70 to 75% of Caitlyn's 2's DPS. And we can reason it out that basically Talon 1, by adding Talon 1, you're doing more damage than by adding Cog 1, because the synergy isn't as effective as the ability of Talon. In this particular case, Talon and Blitz also has a hidden synergy, because Talon can mark the guy Blitz grabs and then mark another guy, so then Talon has two Blitz stacks going on at the same time. You can find out more about my hidden synergy guide I wrote for Set 5 with this link. But either way, even without the Blitzcrank, the point is that Talon 1 is more worthwhile than adding Sniper 2. Like another example that is commonly brought up is, should I run 2 Scrap or 2 Bruiser? So Bruiser is really easy, so let's just talk about Bruiser first. Bruiser is just 125 HP for your team, 250 HP for your Bruiser, and then this scales with the number of units on your team. So for example, if you have 3 units, that's you know, you're only getting 3 times 125 HP. If you have like 5 units, you're getting 5 times that. And then for Scrap, I guess it's the same thing. Scrap early is about 80 HP for your entire team, because it's 3 item components plus the full item. And then it also gives it for your entire team, so it scales with the number of units you have. Also, Scrap gives you a full item. So for how much is a full item worth, right? On a 1-star unit, it's probably not very valuable, but on a 2-star unit, it is definitely worth a lot. It also depends on the item component. So like a bow on an Ezreal, which is very valuable because it has very many good items, I would estimate it's about a 40% damage increase. But a rod on Ezreal is not very good, and there's very, very many bad items. I would estimate a 10% damage increase or even less. So I would say overall, Scrap is worth a little less than Bruiser early on. But it's definitely comparable. And then during the later stages, stage 4-1, Scrap value goes up a lot. So let's just say you have 8 item components. Then Scrap would be 160 HP shield for your entire team plus a full item. Next, I wanted to briefly mention Bruiser versus Bodyguard. So a common early game question is, I hear a lot of people asking is, should I run Bruiser frontline or Bodyguard frontline? Basically, you have to take the following into account: 2-star versus 1-star. So once you have a 2-star Bodyguard, the Bodyguard scales with star level because it has more base HP, which means more value from having armor. For a 1-star unit, Bruisers don't actually scale with star level, right? Because a 1-star Bruiser, 1-star with 2 Bruisers gives the same amount of HP as 2-star 2 Bruisers. Now, Bruisers do scale with the number of units you have. So usually, let's just say if you're like 3 units, then Bruiser is giving 125 times 3 HP. If you have 5 units, Bruiser is giving 125 times 5 amount of HP. I haven't worked out the math myself. I'm a little lazy to do it, so I mean, I'll leave it as an exercise for the viewers, and maybe someone in the comments can provide some detailed math. But for my intuition, and this is usually what I follow, if you have 2-star bodyguards, then you should run 2 bodyguards. And if you have 1-star bodyguards, usually 2 Bruiser is slightly stronger. Okay, so now I want to talk about breaking down the assassin synergy. So the assassin synergy is a really weird one because there's two cases. There's cases with units that can inherently crit, like Twitch and Shaco, and there's a case too with units that have abilities that need assassins to crit. So for example, Talon, without the assassin buff, his ability cannot crit. Katarina, without the assassin buff, her ability cannot crit. And the TRDR is that Twitch and Shaco with 2 assassins gets a 9.3 damage increase, and Cat, Talon, and Akali with 2 assassins get a 13% damage increase. So this number's a little bit weird, but I'll explain in a second. So the detailed math is on the next slide. And the items like IEJG and Last Whisper kind of muddles these numbers, but for the most part, these are pretty correct. So here's the math. The math is actually really simple. You just have to calculate the average damage without assassins, and then calculate the average damage with assassins. So the average damage without assassins is 0.25% chance to crit times the 1.3 crit damage plus the chance to not crit, and your average damage is 1.075. With 2 assassins, your damage is your chance to crit times your crit damage updated plus the chance to not crit equals 1.175. So if you divide these numbers, I realized I divided, anyways, if you divide these numbers, you get a 9.3% damage increase. And I do want to mention that a 9.3% damage increase is very, very low. Just in general, 2 assassins is almost never worth it on Twitch and Shaco. You're better off running another unit. Now for case 2, let's talk about if our assassin only cares about ability damage. So with 0 assassins, this ability can't crit. So it's just a 1%. It's just a 100% chance to no crit, and get a base damage of 1. With 2 assassins, you have a 35% chance to crit times the crit damage, plus the 65% chance to not crit, getting you this number. Now you get a 17.5% damage increase in this case. So like for your Katarina, if you only care about her ability, you get a 17.5% damage increase. In this case, most assassins care equal parts about magic and physical damage, right? So like Talon often does equal magical and physical. So to get a better estimate, I would say to average this number and this number to get 13.4% damage increase. So once again, the TLDR is that Twitch and Shaco get a 9% damage increase. Katarina, Talon, Akali get a 13% damage increase. Maybe Akali can say that she gets a 17% damage increase because she only does damage with her abilities. But in general, Assassins is a very, very weak synergy. If you're running a 2-star Twitch, you pretty much don't even need Assassins for him to do damage. Now, I wanted to briefly mention AP as well, because AP is not very clear often how strong it is. So, for example, 2 Arcanists gives you 20 AP. 20 AP just means 20% more damage for your AP casters, so for like your Ziggs and TF. However, a caveat is that most early game damage, I would say from 2-1 to 3-1, is actually almost all physical. So you can consider, instead of saying 20% damage, you can kind of calculate as maybe 10% more damage for these carries, because they're doing half physical anyways, so like it's just 10% more damage. So I covered most of the like synergies I want to cover, and maybe I can just roughly go over the rest of the synergies. These are all based off of my estimation and my intuition and how I think of these synergies. So like I said, these are not really hard facts. These are not hard numbers, but I use them internally to judge which board is stronger by using by reducing these synergies down to something simple. So Innovator 3, I usually think of, depending on how many 2-star innovators I have, between 1800 to 1200, taking into account the Scarab's ability, because he does some damage reduction. I think it usually does around 400 to 500 damage with its auto attacks and its abilities. So that's what I think of it as. Syndicate 3 is a little bit tricky. Syndicate 3 is roughly usually just 60 armor and MR on your frontliner, usually Darius. And then the 20% healing is a little bit wonky to calculate because there's no easy way to see how much healing your unit's doing. I kind of estimate around 100 HP healed on every unit though. Okay, Academy 2. The easiest way to calculate Academy is just assume every unit on your team casts once. With a 4-unit board, Academy is usually about 30 AP and AD. Okay, Challenger 2 is a pretty complicated one. Challenger 2, usually for your range units, I like to just assume there's no procs, no Challenger procs, so 30% damage increase. For melee units, though, the gap closing aspect is very, very relevant because the walking speed is really slow in TFT. So if your unit can just dash around, it just means they have a lot more uptime of DPS. So for Warwick and Camille, this is extremely relevant. So in a fight lasting about 20 seconds, let's just say they dash like even once. That's usually 2 to 3 seconds of uptime. So that's about 10 to 15% damage increase. So with a 30% damage increase and the 10 to 15% bonus damage increase, for melee challengers, usually it goes up to about 40 to 45% damage increase for melee challengers. That's why even like units like Yone and Fiora really want Challenger 2 at the very least. So now you have to take in maybe account the Challenger procs, so how the attack speed doubles. So I just added like a 5% for each of the categories. So like a 35% damage for range units and a 50% damage increase for melee units. So Challenger 2 is a very, very good synergy. Twin shot is a pretty powerful synergy. It's really simple. 40% damage to attack twice, so it's just a 40% damage increase. The number is actually a little bit smaller because it doesn't attack twice instantly. It attacks twice with like a little bit of delay, right? So like 35 to 40% damage increase and get a 5 AD. The 5 AD you can also calculate as a percentage of your damage increase. For example, 5 AD on Graves, how much is that? 5 AD on like Gangplank, how much is that as a percentage? Protector 2 is a little complicated because Protector 2 can be really bad to insanely broken depending on how many items the unit has. So for like a unit that has no items, usually Protector 2 it only casts once, so that's just 20% effective HP. But let's just say you have a bunch of items on your Protector. Sometimes it can go infinite, right? So it just becomes infinite effective HP. I would say for the most part, early game, if it has one item, it can cast twice usually with a 40% effective HP. So usually I think of it as 20% and 40%. Clockwork 2 is really simple. It's just 15% damage for your whole team. I just want to clarify these are all for early game, right? So Clockwork 2, you just think of it as 15%, then later 20%, then 25%. I'm just talking about it as if it's early game. Socialite 1 is really simple. It's just 20% damage increase. Enforcer 2 is a little complicated. I kind of think of it as how much uptime you're preventing the enemy unit from having. So like if a fight lasts 20 seconds, then the unit gets enforced for 5 seconds. That's just 25% of the time without one unit. So like another way to think about it is basically how much damage you're preventing, right? Say we enforce the enemy Graves, how much damage are we preventing? Graves 2 has a DP of 64. If you're enforcing him for 5 seconds, that means you're basically preventing Graves from doing 320 damage to your team. And then you also delayed the enemy's ability by about 5 seconds. It's a little hard to estimate, but I think 500 is a pretty safe number. It goes up dramatically if your opponent has a valuable enforcer target, and goes down dramatically if your opponent does not have an enforceable target. So, Imperial 3, once again, a very simple synergy. Imperial 3 is just a flat 75% damage increase. This is probably the best synergy in the game. Imperial 3 or Challenger 2, it's very close. Then Scholar. So Scholar is kind of tricky as well. Scholar gives about 2.5 mana a second. Most casters have about 0.65 attack speed. Every attack generates 10 mana, which means most casters generate 6.5 mana a second. So basically 2.5 mana added on to 6.5 is roughly about 38% increase in casting time, which for most backliners is 38% damage increase. Once again, you have to keep in mind that early game, magic damage is low, so early game I would half this damage, so early game it would only be about a 20% damage increase. And then here's some of the synergies I'm going to go ahead and skip. Chemtech 3. Chemtech is just a very hard trait to analyze overall. Basically, it scales with the 2-star version extremely hard. The HP regen and the damage reduction, and the fact that often 1-star units will die before the full 8 seconds, so they don't get the full value off of Chemtech. It's really hard to analyze, but usually, basically, I don't highly value Chemtechs unless I have 2-star Chemtechs in general. And then for mutants, obviously you can analyze it and you can go through the math for every single one. However, most of them are pretty complicated and I'm kind of lazy, so I'm not going to go ahead and do it. Plus, mutants right now is a pretty niche comp. Either you play around Cho'Gath or you play around Protector Kog'Maw. But either way, mutants is usually not a trait you try to splash in. And then there's a few traits that are technically possible to estimate how strong they are, but virtually like, what's it called? Virtually impossible because it's just too complicated. So mercenaries, you either all in on them, you try to get a huge cash out, or you just don't play them. So it's really hard to estimate how strong they are. And Yordles, technically it gives you 1.6 gold a round. It has a this looks like a table of Yordle drop rates, and theoretically it gives no combat strength, but in practice it does give you combat strength because it lets you 2-star your units, which is very impactful. So a lot of times, even though you're playing Yordles, you're actually extremely stable by playing Yordles. And then finally, I want to briefly mention that it's really simple to talk about these synergies when you dumb it down like this, but synergies are actually slightly more complex than how I make it sound, right? So, for example, some synergies in the game are inherently multiplicative, like Bodyguards plus Enchanter. When an Enchanter heals a Bodyguard unit, that healing is worth a lot more. Um, the same synergy, for example, Bruiser plus Enchanter has no multiplicative synergy, right? Because when a Enchanter heals a Bruiser, that health is not worth any more. So there's a lot of these what's called hidden synergies or hidden synergies between traits, but I'm not gonna go ahead and cover everything. I thought at least to mention it because this way people have like a place to start thinking from. But definitely worth thinking about. And then I wanted to do some in-game examples, but I mean this video is already really long, so I was thinking of maybe doing in-game examples in another video, but then I wasn't really sure if people would even find it helpful. So I mean, if you guys would like in-game examples, I would be down to do some. But yeah, I hope this is covers everything. Honestly, this is like a video I've been meaning to do for a very long time, and if I could pick one video, I think this is the video I would like definitely have people watch on my channel, because I think this video really captures what it means to like analyze strongest board. So I think that goes ahead and does it for me. Thanks.